and an 18-month-old baby to the party. And the party went on through the evening of July the 4th, and about 2 o'clock in the morning on July the 5th, in the middle of the night, they left this party in downtown Lakeland at some people's homes to return to their house in North Lakeland. When they arrived at the house, Jasmine took the 6-year-old and the 8-year-old into the house, said, "I'm going to give them something to eat," and put them to bed. And Jasmine told Joel, "Bring the baby into the house." Joel then was taking some food stuff, some trays of food into the house. Jasmine went in to feed a 6- and an 8-year-old child, and she put them to bed, and subsequently she went to bed. Joel, when he was taking the food trays into the house, noticed the right rear door open. When he finished taking the food trays into the house, he noticed the door was closed. So now he thought that Jasmine must have gotten the child. So he went in. Jasmine was in bed, asleep. He went to bed asleep about 3 o'clock in the morning. Now listen to my timeline here. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Joel wakes up at 10 o'clock and is preparing to get ready to go to work. About an hour later at 11 o'clock, he looks at the 8-year-old and says, "Where is the baby?" This 18-month-old little girl. Jasmine's still in bed asleep. The 8-year-old looks around and says, "I don't know where she is," where she normally slept, in the bed or in the room with the 8-year-old. So Joel starts to look throughout the house, and he doesn't see the baby. He goes to the car, and there is the baby, still strapped in the child carrier in the car, with a heat index 105 degrees on that day. He grabbed the child carrier and the infant from the car, runs inside screaming for Jasmine. Jasmine, who it's reported has some medical training, looks at the baby and says, "I know the baby is deceased, is dead." Despite that, they grab the baby out of the car seat. They rush to Lakeland Regional Medical Center. And upon arrival there, even though it's painfully evident that this child has suffered a torturous death, a absolute torturous death, Lakeland Regional still worked on the baby to try to save its life. But it, in fact, was deceased. What's interesting about this is that the investigation begins, as you can imagine that it should. And here's what we discovered. Jasmine and Joel are given a quick test 17 hours after arriving home. 17 hours after arriving home from the party. Jasmine tests positive for alcohol and marijuana. Joel tests positive for alcohol, marijuana, and methamphetamine 17 hours later. So you can imagine what kind of shape that they were in when they arrived from this party and left this child harnessed in the baby seat in the back of the car. This child's 18 months old. She's not old enough to let herself out of the harness, but she's certainly old enough to realize that she is suffering a torturous death at the negligence of Joel and Jasmine. The investigation goes on. We determined that Joel has a criminal history. He was arrested 2 times at 15 and 18 years of age concerning a shooting event. At that time in his life, he was documented as a gang member. He also has currently pending against him charges of methamphetamine and carrying a concealed firearm. Those charges are pending at this time. He also has a history of resisting arrest. And now our detectives this afternoon are adding the criminal charge of aggravated manslaughter of a child, which is a first-degree felony. Jasmine doesn't have a criminal history, but she does now. She's been charged with aggravated manslaughter of a child. Now, interestingly enough, when the investigation began by our detectives, after the hospital tried life-saving maneuvers, which includes cooling the baby down, when we started our investigation at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, after the life-saving measures, after the body being cooled down, the baby still had a core temperature of 104.4 degrees. And this was like 3 hours after the baby was taken out of the hot car. 3 hours after the baby was taken out of the hot car and the hospital tried to cool the baby down. This rips your heart out. There's no other way to explain it. We all have or had children or grandchildren, or both obviously, or nieces or nephews that have been 18 months old, and we know how vibrant they are, how active they are, but how fragile they are. And this child, from 3 o'clock in the morning until she was discovered, was harnessed and could not get away from this. The investigation's ongoing. The child otherwise was healthy in that it was not deprived of food. The other children are not deprived of food. This is not an accident. This is pure negligence. And I suggest to you the core of the negligence is the abuse of drugs and the use of drugs. And who suffered? Who died? The 18-month-old baby. So don't ever tell me that these drugs are low level and nonviolent, because they're at the core of why this child is dead today. Are there any questions?
Sheriff, can you tell us just any sense of remorse that the parents have? I mean, no matter how much you convict them, they're going to convict themselves. So.
Well, they are remorseful that the child's dead. And the investigation goes on at this time. But I think the real remorse will be tonight when they're sitting in the county jail in an air-conditioned environment by themselves, thinking it's nice and cool here when my baby baked to death because of my negligence and my use of drugs. And they will and have to be held accountable for such horrible conduct.
Any sense of, any sense of knowing that it was 3 o'clock in the morning, so there was some time the baby was just in there and was okay. Any sense of what temperature, how long the baby suffered in that time when the temperatures really got to that point?
Certainly the overnight temperatures are in the 70s, high 70s. And by sunrise and a little after, you're into the 80s, and then it jumps up into the 85 and 90 by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. The heat index we estimate to be at 105, so it was probably 94, 95 degrees. The car was outside, not in a garage, not under a tree, not under any shade at all. And obviously we will try to recreate with the same temperatures the heat of the car. Research shows us that the temperature of the car could have been anywhere between 130 and 170 degrees at that time. Well, absolutely. There has been record heat here. In fact, something that I don't normally do, I sent out all mails to my deputies who wear vests, bulletproof vests, to say, hey, you have to start hydrated and you have to stay hydrated all day long. When it's 95, 96 degrees, the heat index is 105, 106, as we know that you all have reported. It is brutally hot for everyone under the best of circumstances. And then this child is shut in the car, obviously with no movement of air, with it becoming hotter and hotter and hotter as the morning went on. And you just can't, I mean, there aren't words to explain this. And Jasmine's still in bed asleep. She still in bed asleep. Has no idea that her baby is in the shape it's in.
Where are the other two children at the moment?
The other children are with other relatives. DCF obviously has been notified and is doing a parallel investigation. They responded immediately. DCF works really, really close and really, really well with us, and their response was immediate.
Can you tell us where that North Lakeland home is?
I don't have that information with me, but